Go into effect in 2023 will criminalize people who sleep on state-owned land.
Missourians who filed the suit say this law makes it dangerous for people who are struggling to find shelter. But a lawmaker behind the legislation says it wasn't intended to turn the homeless into criminals. Instead, it was to offer more resources to those who need it the most.
The same trends when it comes to sheltered versus unsheltered homelessness. We saw a little bit of an increase in 2024, about 28% of our point in time count surveyed individuals were unsheltered, so that's 173. And again, we acknowledge, we know that that is an underrepresentation, so the true number is greater than that. So it's definitely an issue. I don't know how you want to quantify and say on a scale of 1 to, but you know, unsheltered homelessness, especially in the metro areas, I think we've seen increases. We've seen increases across the board. We've seen increases like not only statewide and in our area, but like nationally, coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic and coming out of some of the protective measures that were put into place. We're seeing more people enter into homelessness for the first time now. We're seeing more families experiencing homelessness for the first time. So yeah, it's an issue.
And everywhere in between. And we, when I say we, I mean the East-West Gateway Council of Governments, which I am currently the chair. The chair rotates every year. And as chair, I challenge my colleagues who are the city leaders or county leaders from the region to come together to bring in national experts and talk about how we tackle homelessness. And out of that summit was a 3-day practicum with our service providers and funders. And now we have a path forward to address our unhoused as a region and hopefully put a huge dent in the number of unhoused people that we come in contact with.
And the reason we lost housing, there are many reasons, but there was a big reduction in federal spending on affordable housing. There was also urban renewal that ended up destroying or tearing down a lot of affordable housing, replacing it with higher price housing.
You know, one thing is that we do need more funding to support students experiencing homelessness. So there is federal funding through the Education for Homeless Children and Youth Act. And so our state gets some of that funding and then we distribute it to school districts. For example, this year we have 13 school districts that have that funding, but we have about 565 school districts in the state. So the rest of those districts are supporting homeless students a lot of the times, but they don't have targeted funding for homeless students. So they might be relying on other grant funding or private donations, or they might be working with church groups to get things like food and clothes and hygiene items and things like that. So the schools are doing a lot for those students, but sometimes they don't have deep enough pockets to reach into for those resources to meet everyone's needs. So in an ideal world, they would have more of those resources and more funding for that, because the school can be such a hub for where a family can get resources. They may not be interested in going to a shelter, they may not be interested in going to a food bank, but their kids are going to be enrolled in school, so they're going to be interacting with somebody there who may be willing to help, but with more funding, specifically for homeless students, they would be able to do more. So that would make a big difference. And then in any aspect of homelessness that you work in, there's also always the dilemma of low wages and high housing costs. And so that may not be directly what we work with whenever we're working in the schools, but it's always a factor. For example, in Missouri, we have like a good percentage of our families who are experiencing homelessness are living doubled up in households. They're not necessarily in shelters or sleeping outside, but because of high housing costs and low wages, they're having to find ways to kind of cram up together in households and sort of get stuck in that because they can't afford their own housing. So closing that gap between wages and housing costs would also go a long way.